Good afternoon. My name is Bryan Moeller. I am the chair of the American Gem Society Gemological Sciences Committee, and I'd like to welcome you to the importance of diamond verification instruments for consumer protection and confidence. A couple of notes before we start. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on AGS Pro following the webinar. At the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A section. So as your questions come up, please post them in the Q&A section and they will be addressed following at the end of the webinar. So I'd like to start by introducing our very well-respected panel of experts. First, I'd like to start with Grant Mobley. Grant is with the Natural Diamond Council, and he is here to give us updates on Project Assure and its background. Next, I have Joel Hasle, ICGA of Von Hasle Jewelry Advisors. Joel is the chair of the Appraisal Standards Committee, and he's going to talk about the importance of equipment and processes when it comes to screening for synthetic or lab-grown diamonds. Next, we have Abel, CG of American Gem Society Laboratories. He's going to talk a little bit about how the diamond verification devices work, their uses, their technology, and American Gem Society's recommended accuracy thresholds. Finally, I have Sara Yood, Esquire. She is the Deputy General Counsel for the Jewelers Vigilance Committee. She's going to talk a bit about the risks associated with undisclosed synthetic or lab-grown diamonds. So welcome, everybody. I'll start by going to Joel. Joel, can you tell us a little bit about the reason for the webinar, why diamond verification instruments are important, and why it's important to have the right screening devices for your firm's intended purposes?
One of the questions that I get asked a couple times a week, at least, from other retailers, other appraisers is, I need to buy a screening device. What should I buy? And it's usually in a text or sometimes in an email. And I immediately have to respond with, hold on, what do you want to do with it? What are you going to use it for? They're not all created equal, and they all do different things based on what you're looking for. There is no single one machine that will work for everything across the board. Not that anybody wants to have to buy multiple machines, but it's important to ask the questions of what do you want to do with the machine when you decide which one to buy. Whether it's appraising, buying over the counter, screening your incoming merchandise, even to some extent, checking your client's items for repair. Sometimes there might be some things to be concerned with if you're going to check things in for repair, but it's important to be consistent too from point to point or from time to time, because that consistency is what will help build your credibility with your clients and then help that protection down the road, where if you have one of those machines and you're really only using it sporadically or inconsistently, that's when you've got a little bit more liability, I'm thinking. And I know Sara will probably talk to that if you're not consistent in it, your protection kind of goes right out the window.
Thank you. And speaking of Sara, I would like to next turn to her, and she can talk a little bit about why it's important for a retailer or a wholesaler to have proper disclaimers and procedures in place when discussing or disclosing lab-grown diamonds.
Of course. Thank you, Bryan, and apologies if you can hear a siren in the background. I'm in New York City and this just happens here. So thanks again for hosting this to AGS and for the opportunity to talk on this subject. At JVC, we talk a lot about having proper procedures, contracts, plans in place to make sure that jewelry businesses are positioned well to be correctly selling products. Part of why that matters is because the Federal Trade Commission tells us it has to. The jewelry guides, which lay out how we're supposed to advertise jewelry, have specific terminology that we are supposed to use for natural diamonds or laboratory grown diamonds And so in order to correctly advertise your products, you need to know exactly what it is you're selling. So that's part of why it's important, just sort of on the base level. Additionally, businesses could be potentially liable for unknowingly selling a laboratory grown diamond as a natural diamond. So if you maybe didn't know that the product you were selling was actually a laboratory grown diamond, you did not test or your supplier did not test, and then a consumer purchases that product, finds out that it's not what they thought it was, they can come and sue you. That consumer can sue you. In addition to that, if it's determined that you as a business have a pattern or practice of not testing your products, not only can a consumer sue you for that, but a group of consumers could band together and file a class action lawsuit against your business for not properly disclosing products and for consumer deception. The list goes on from there. You know, competitors can sue, or the Federal Trade Commission themselves can actually enforce against businesses using the FTC Act. And, you know, they can basically enforce penalties against you for incorrectly advertising your products. So there's a lot of legal liability here and potential for lawsuits. They're very, very costly. You'd have to hire your own lawyer, and you know it can be a really big mess. So generally, this is really, really important because you need to know what it is you're actually selling and make sure you're correctly disclosing that information to your consumer.
Is the disclosure process different for a retailer than for a vendor or wholesaler?
It's a great question. The Federal Trade Commission guidelines apply to all levels of the trade. So it's not just about retailers. For manufacturers, they apply just the same. So a manufacturer selling to a retailer has to disclose whether a product is laboratory grown or it's a, you know, a regular natural diamond. So everybody needs to have this information. So if you are a manufacturer on the call, or if you're higher up in the supply chain, you still need to have this kind of testing, you know, the instruments and the ability to test your products, because you have to pass that information down along the supply chain so that the end consumer gets the correct information.
Thank you very much. Very insightful. Grant, you are with Project Assure and have been working with Project Assure for 3 years now, 4 years?
4 years.
Wow. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of Project Assure, why it was founded, and what the goal of the project is?
Absolutely. So echoing everyone, you know, thanks for having me. This is such an important topic. So I'm really glad that we're getting together to do this. So basically, as Bryan said, I've been with the Natural Diamond Council now for about 5 years. We launched Project Assure shortly after that. So it's been going on for even over 4 years at this point. But basically what, you know, we're a nonprofit organization, and what we do is, you know, a big part of our focus is obviously consumer protection, because consumer protection, ensuring that that consumers don't get a bad taste in their mouth about the natural diamond industry, is obviously a big part of making sure that the industry does better and better, you know, every year. So part of what we did was we realized that with diamond verification instruments, there was no independent third-party company or laboratory testing the diamond verification instruments that were on the market at the time. And if you think about any other, pretty much any other electronic that we use in our lives, so, you know, hypothetically, a microwave, for instance, there are organizations, you know, that test these consumer electronics to make sure that they operate in the way that they're advertised and to make sure they're not going to kill you, you know. So, but, you know, as I'm sure the vast majority of the people on this call realize, our industry is even more unique sometimes than we think it is. We are very much an outlier in many ways. And there is absolutely and was absolutely no independent third-party company that was testing and verifying these machines to make sure that they did what they're advertised to do. Therefore, you know, you could have easily purchased a machine 5 years ago from a manufacturer based on, you know, advertisements or something. And how would you know that that machine was actually doing the job? You know, so Project Ashore was a very detailed project that was put together in order to do just that. So we have two laboratories. One laboratory is called Underwriters Laboratories, UL, which is a very, very large company, consumer electronic testing company based in Massachusetts. The other one is the University of Antwerp in Belgium. They are our two laboratories. We worked with gem laboratories such as AGS and GIA, SS, you know, in Switzerland, the Gem Laboratory in China, all together to develop a very strict testing procedure to essentially put these machines through the ringer. But not only just test them, you know, very, you know, stringently, but also to be able to figure out and develop, you know, very clear metrics as to how they were operating, and then communicate those metrics to the trade. So, you know, we have an ashore sample set of diamonds that consists of over 1,000 stones, and that is natural diamonds, that is different types of simulants, different types of synthetics or laboratory grown diamonds, HPHT, CVD, post-treated, you name it. You know, if it has been created to try to imitate a natural diamond, then it is being tested by these machines. And I think that like we can get into it later, but kind of Ashore 2.0, which is what's going on right now, which is very important. So we started doing this about 4 years ago. We have over 30 machines now that have been independently tested on our Ashore directory, which it's easy to find if you just Google, you know, Ashore diamond, it'll be the first thing that pops up. But what is happening right now, so that testing has been ongoing, and right now we're working on what we call Ashore 2.0, and that is essentially a second round of even better testing on the newest models of all of these machines. So if you go on our Ashore directory and you see a machine and you say, hey, I know that company has now a 2.0 version of that machine, that's what we're working on testing right now, but we're kind of going a step above and beyond that as well. So we're implementing a new type of testing that will be reliability testing. So instead of testing the sample set one time, we actually will test the same sample set 3 times with the same machine. And what this does is it allows us to create an entirely new metric in the machine testing that says, how reliable is it in its results? So was it consistent among testing those 1,000 stones, or did it change? Was it 99% accurate the first time and 100% accurate the second time and 97% accurate the third time, and so on and so forth? So it's going to give a much clearer picture of the performance of those machines. So that's what's going on right now. As a matter of fact, everyone on this call is getting a little bit of a preview, because we will be sending out a press release in a couple of weeks that details everything that's about to come out with Ashore 2.0. That will come out in about 2 weeks, and the new Ashore website is launching with all those new machines being tested, is launching before the end of October. So that's something we can really look forward to.
Great news. We've been waiting for this for quite some time. We're excited to see the results.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you wanted me to go in.
Sorry, go on.
No, I didn't know if you wanted me to go into the finished jewelry testing, or if we can talk about it.
I was just going to mention that. So, okay. You know, with 2.0, you started testing finished jewelry, and talk a little bit about that and what type of jewelry is being screened.
Correct. So finished jewelry was something we didn't have the capacity to do at the beginning. We were only doing loose. Of course, we are a nonprofit, so we have to work within what we're able to do. But we are, with 2.0, we are launching finished jewelry. The finished jewelry is any machine that stated capabilities allows for finished jewelry testing will be tested with finished jewelry. So of course there's machines on the market that do not advertise that they are useful for finished jewelry. So those machines are not going to be tested. So just keep in mind, we only test based on what the manufacturer says the machine is able to do. So there are two different in the same way that there are two sample sets for the loose diamonds, there's the regular sample set of 1,000 stones, and then there's a sample set that we call the smalls sample set, which includes very, very, very small diamonds, so 1 millimeter and under. You can see the results for both of those sample sets on the Ashore directory. But now, when the launch of the new one, you'll be able to see a third set of results for finished jewelry. And so in the same way that loose, we have the finished jewelry sample set 1, which includes diamonds 2 millimeters and above. So there's 2 or 3 dozen pieces of individual jewelry that are being tested with all diamonds 2 millimeters and above. That jewelry consists of bracelets, necklaces, earrings set in platinum and gold, and silver, just to make sure that there's no differences there in the testing depending on the metal. We're testing, it's a combination of open back, closed back, and so on. So it's quite extensive, pretty much anything, invisible set, non-invisible set, and so on. So it's quite a robust sample set of a couple dozen pieces of jewelry. That's for the sample set 1. And then for sample set 2, there is another couple dozen pieces of jewelry that will be tested with 2 millimeter and under stones. And again, some of these machines' capability doesn't allow for a lower than 2 millimeters. So that is why there's 2 sample sets there. But you'll be able to transparently see the results of every single machine. There's very, very, if you wanted to really go in the weeds with the details on how the machines perform on specific types of jewelry, specific types of simulants, specific types of CVD and HPHT, you can really get very detailed. But of course, we try to make it as simple as possible and create those metrics that allow you to compare machines against one another.
Thank you for that. We're very much looking forward to the results. I'd like to go to Wade now. Wade's going to talk a little bit about the various methods that the machines use to test lab-grown diamonds and the various technologies available.
Sure, great. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Pretty much most companies that provide diamond verification instruments won't reveal exactly how the instruments work. Believe me, I've asked quite a few of them. However, you can tell a bit about how they work just by using them or seeing them in action. So I'll give some information about the technology that is typically used there. But overall, the analysis and the results is often based on the reaction of the stones being tested when exposed to different wavelengths of energy, like UV or infrared. Natural diamonds have reactions that are or are not visible under these conditions, and the same goes for laboratory grown diamonds. What is being determined by the instruments is the differences in these. So what is something that is visible with natural diamonds may not be with laboratory grown, or vice versa. So with that in mind, some of the technologies that are used, I'm just going to go through a few of these, and not specific to any instruments. This is just sort of in general. One of them is UV-vis spectroscopy, which actually uses wavelengths of energy within the UV and visible ranges and a spectrometer. Usually, most of the ones that use spectroscopy are looking for specific peaks that would indicate natural or laboratory grown or absence of peaks, and note that difference. Another is fluorescent spectroscopy, which just uses the UV range of the wavelength. And which is also analyzed by a spectrometer. Another way is how much material absorbs UV or does not, which is known as UV transparency. Most colorless laboratory grown diamonds are usually type 2, which does not absorb UV, whereas the majority of colorless natural diamonds are type 1A, about 98%, and those will absorb UV. However, the natural can be type 2 as well. So we won't go into diamond types and all of that and the specific peak numbers and things like that. But this is just for an overview. If you want to know more information about that, you can ask me off the webinar. Another technology that is used is phosphorescence imaging, which basically looks at the phosphorescence intensity and color. And phosphorescence is the glow that's sort of like left after a UV source is turned off. So, which is a little bit different than fluorescence, which brings me to the next one, which is phosphorescence decay, which is like how long does that phosphorescent glow last and what color is it? So these instruments can use any of these technologies or a combination of these technologies to make these determinations. And basically, it's just the difference in how a natural diamond would react as opposed to a laboratory grown diamond would react. There are more determinative instruments that may not be as accessible. Some of the diamond some of the screening instruments that are on the market currently, and those include FTIR spectroscopy, which uses infrared, the infrared wavelength to determine the diamond type, which is very indicative of natural if it's a 1A, because you won't see a 1A in colorless laboratory grown diamonds, and would need further testing if it was a 2A. Another one is fluorescence imaging, which actually uses deep UV, very short wave UV, to illuminate the diamond growth structure itself. So you can see growth structure that's indicative of CVD or HPHT because of the way that they're grown. So those are a little bit more advanced instruments. The ones that are more accessible will use mostly the UV vis spectroscopy, fluorescence spectroscopy, fluorescence transparency, and phosphorescence imaging or decay.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about some of the results that come from the various screening devices and how those can be interpreted?
Yeah, absolutely. So different instruments will provide different results, obviously. Some will tell you if a diamond passes, meaning the diamond is natural, or if it refers, meaning more testing is needed. There are other instruments that provide more specific results, like stating if a diamond is laboratory grown, or CVD, or potentially HPHT, et cetera. But what should be kept in mind is that almost all of these instruments have some sort of limitations, and they have a potential to misidentify a natural diamond as laboratory grown or vice versa. An example of that could be if a natural diamond has a very rare color of fluorescence, like a yellow or green fluorescence, based on the screening instrument's thresholds and built-in programming, it might see that that's out of range for a natural diamond and refer it, meaning it's natural, but it's requesting further testing. So, and like I said, every instrument has different technology and different programming and different software for all these different thresholds and what's in range, out of range for these diamonds, which is very proprietary per instrument. But that's just an example of one of the limitations. And not all instruments will state a definitive result. It might not give you a pass or a refer. It might be up to the interpretation of the operator, which would require training, and that would, be sometimes it could be a subjective call as far as what is being interpreted. Overall, what you want to know is the accuracy rates. So the accuracy rates of the instruments is something that the assured directory is great for. When Grant was talking about all of the details that they're going into and all of the testing that they're doing, it's extremely important because it's going to give a third-party view of the accuracy. Some of the stats that are available include a false positive rate or a referral rate, and I think these are very important because the false positive rate is the percentage of laboratory-grown diamonds that could be misidentified as natural, and a referral rate is the number of natural, or the percentage of natural diamonds that could be that would be referred for further testing. So the closer each of these rates is to 0, the more accurate the instrument is going to be. So if you have a false positive rate of 0%, then you know that if you get a pass result or a natural result, there's no way that that's going to be a laboratory grown diamond. So some of these thresholds are extremely important, and the stats that are coming out of the assured directory really help with that, because you have third parties looking at these stats.
I would point out also that there are machines out there that have 100% or 0% false positive and 100% accuracy rating. Because this is something that I get asked a lot. I think a lot of people in our industry just assume that a lot of synthetics or simulants could get could fool these machines, like there's some certain things that you would absolutely have to send to a laboratory, which is not the case, necessarily. Obviously, we recommend anything that there's in question definitely send to a laboratory just to be sure. But there are great machines out there for sure.
Yeah, and that's actually one of our recommended thresholds, is a absolute 0 on the false positive percentage. So, yeah.
Thank you, both of you. Actually, I have a quick question for Sara. Should we have some procedures in place should a false positive arise? Should there be some sort of disclaimer stating the limitations of the devices that you've chosen to use?
Yep, absolutely. Whether you're at the manufacturer or the retail level, you really should understand the limitations of the machinery that you're using and make sure you have a procedure in place when something does happen. So let's say you do have you're testing what you believe is a natural diamond and it comes up as laboratory grown. You might then decide, okay, there's a certain threshold where we're going to then send these out, or we're going to test them on a different machine, or things like that. So maybe you have a certain machine, but your buddy down the street has a different machine, and perhaps you have an agreement with them that if something comes up, you'll test on someone else's machine to see before you send it out to a lab. I think one of the points I wanted to make about the relative cost of the machinery and the sensitive nature of the machinery is that the more money you invest in getting a better machine, the fewer times you're going to have to go outside to get something checked. And so I think that you have to sort of weigh the difference, when you're evaluating all of this machinery, to say, okay, we could spend less money, but then we'll have to send more things out. We can spend more money and then we'll be able to keep more things in-house. So I think regardless of what happens, you should have some procedures laid out so that your staff knows, okay, if this happens, then this is how we're going to deal with it.
Thank you very much. Joel, can you talk a little bit about some of the various uses within a retail or appraisal setting for synthetic screening devices?
Absolutely. In the retail setting, a lot of people are using them to screen incoming stock. That will definitely, the type of machine will definitely lend itself better to some than others. What's important to remember with these machines and screening incoming stock, like Grant mentioned earlier, none of the results that are published so far were tested or screened using mounted goods. So there's 0%, the reviews, or the ratings don't take into account mountings. And on some of those smaller stones, depending on the method used to screen, being too close to other stones, too close to metal, things like that can greatly impact the results from that machine. So you have to take some of those results, even with a grain of salt, that maybe it has a 0% or a 5% or a low number. There's still a chance that it's a natural diamond, that just because the machine's popped up as refer doesn't automatically mean it was synthetic or lab grown. And then again, on the stock side of things, to know what is your threshold, what's your comfort level, kind of going back to what Sara just said. If you've got a ring with 100 4-point stones in it and 2 flag on your machine, the world's not coming to an end. Take a step back. If you're a gemologist or a diamond grader, look and see, are there some inclusions that you might be led to think, this is a natural diamond, I'm comfortable letting this go through, even though my machine, because if your machine has a 5% fail rate, there's your 5% right there, so that the consistency too with how you're grading it or how you're screening these things. Maybe not every single thing that comes through your door gets screened. Maybe it's 1 out of every 5 on an invoice. Maybe it's anything over 10 points gets screened. That's, again, what you're comfortable with, and knowing that cost balance, what your time's worth, what your employee's time's worth, the back and forth, the labs, it's what you're comfortable with. Sometimes stores are trying to use them to check customer merchandise at the point of drop off for a repair. That can be a very, very tricky subject and a very tricky conversation. It's great to have the machine. You've run the machine, you've run the piece of jewelry through the machine and it says refer. What does that conversation look like with your client, and how do you tactfully handle that? That will take an immense amount of role playing, an immense amount of what if, how about this, how about that, and that bedside manner to not just automatically, hey, you've got a lab grown diamond, and they freak out like I said, the world's coming to an end. Oh my gosh, the retailer sold it to me. How could they? You know, you run that risk of hurting your reputation if you're wrong, which we know some of the machines can be, or the potential of almost accusing a potential competitor, the internet, you know, whoever, of selling somebody a lab-grown diamond and not disclosing it, when that might just not be the case. So I don't want to say don't screen your customers' merchandise when they're dropping off, but if you're going to have a set procedure and follow that to the letter every single time, you're just going to run into problems if you don't. On an appraisal side of things, same thing with any other lab equipment. You're running your test, screening, whatever, refractive index, things like that. Your liability remains the same. If I misgrade a synthetic emerald or a lab-grown emerald, I'm just as liable if I miscall a lab-grown diamond natural or vice versa. So there's no increased liability other than we appraise a lot more diamonds. For the most part, we appraise a lot more diamonds. So your chances go up, but the liability is the same. You made a mistake, you're the expert. The back of every grading report, there's court cases that prove the labs don't hold any responsibility for misgrading. It's the retailers and the appraisers who are being paid for our professional opinion and the consumer protection. A grading report is just the lab's opinion. It's not to be used as a warranty. Where with the retailer and the appraiser, that's where all the liability falls.
Aside from liability, can you talk a little bit about how, and you touched on this a bit, about how it can affect your reputation?
Oh, it can be detrimental. To misgrade something. Yeah, I don't want to say it caught me off guard, but it's a horrible situation to be put in. And so you want to make sure you're taking those steps. I do know people who have 2 and 3 different types of machines, from a simple $500 one up to the $20,000 piece of equipment, because again, some of those expensive pieces of equipment, you spent $25,000 on a machine, and so you've got this false sense of security that, well, the machine told me it's fine. Well, that machine's wrong 15% of the time, so you can't just push it off on that. It's still your reputation on the line. You can't sit across from your client and say, well, my machine told me. It doesn't work that way. So no, the chance of ruining your reputation on a missed call like that is pretty important.
When we talked, when we were preparing for this webinar, Sara had a good point about why, maybe it was Grant who mentioned it, regardless, why it is important to check yourself when you're purchasing merchandise and not just relying on what your wholesaler or vendor or manufacturer said. Grant, was that you that mentioned that? Can you speak a little bit about that? You're on mute there.
Apologies. Yes, it was me. I think that Sara could probably answer the question better than me. So I'll let her take it, but I do think that that's really important.
Thanks, Grant. Yes. So the way lawsuits and liability work is, so let's say you are a retail jeweler and you sell something to your customer and it turns out that wasn't it. And you as a retailer might say, well, I had an agreement in place with my supplier and they were supposed to check things. And they told me that it was natural. So I believed them. And now here I am in this situation. So yes, as a retailer in that situation, you certainly can bring in your supplier as a potential additional defendant in a lawsuit. But you're going to be the first line of defense. You as the retailer are the business that the consumer is going to turn around and say, hey, you told me this was something and you made a mistake. So now I am suing you. And while yes, you can bring in your supplier as what's called a contributory defendant, it's a whole bunch of legalese mess. It's just, it's not going to prevent you, the retailer, from being held liable for this. So it's really, really important to have agreements set up with your suppliers about testing, but it's also important for you as a retailer to back that up with your own testing. You know, you might say, I feel like in this business, we have a long history of people saying, oh, my father did business with his father, and my grandfather did business with his grandfather, and I trust them, and et cetera. And that's, I mean, it's beautiful. And I think it's part of what makes our industry really fascinating, but it's also not a thing you should actually rely on when it comes to disclosure of goods. So when you have a deal with your supplier and they're supposed to be checking things, that's great, but you have to back that up with some kind of quality assurance in your business, just to make sure that they're doing what they actually say they're doing, and so that you can, you know, stave off problems before they become a consumer problem.
And I think it's you know, important to point out too, that just because you're checking the merchandise that's coming in from your vendor doesn't mean you don't trust them. Because I feel like I've had a lot of people act like that was the case. That's not the case, because I've seen it. I'm sure most of the people on this call have seen it, where let's say I'm a retailer and I do test the things that are coming in from my vendor, and you find something. For instance, I've had a vendor call me before and they're like, oh my gosh, Grant, something happened and we sent somebody something that was lab grown. And I know this person really well. And it wasn't anybody's fault other than this was being, you know, manufactured in, you know, their facility overseas, and something happened on that end of it. So it's, you know, there's so many different parts of this value chain where things can happen. But when the jewelry gets to your door, you're the end of that chain. So that is where it needs to be tested. And that is the biggest one that matters, because again, it's your reputation. And to Sarah's point, yeah, maybe after litigation, you can get out of being financially liable eventually, you know, for something, but the damage is done a lot of times in terms of your reputation. So
you're still going to need to pay a lawyer, even if you get all your money back.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I noticed that there are no questions in the Q&A section yet. So please do post your questions as they come up. We're here to, there's one. We're here to help and answer anything that you have, and we'll get into the Q&A section in about 5 minutes or so. I want to go back to Grant a little bit. Does Project Assure work with machine manufacturers to improve their results?
Fantastic question. You know, that is actually one of the reasons Project Assure was started in the first place, is because we wanted to, through independent testing and through the sharing and complete transparency of the results of that testing of the individual machines. So when a machine comes to Project Assure, it does so in good faith from the manufacturer of that machine. So they have to, you know, we're not out there buying every machine and just testing them. Those machines have to be sent to us by the manufacturer of that machine. And so when they do so, the testing, the very rigorous testing that the machine goes through, it is meticulously documented how that machine performs. And I mean down to the individual stones. So, and what treatment that stone has had, et cetera, et cetera. And that all of that data is shared with the manufacturer in the hopes that they will analyze the data to figure out where the machine was strong, where their machine was not strong, where it needs improvement, et cetera. So, you know, the idea behind this is that sharing and transparency of data with the manufacturer will continuously improve the performance of these machines over time. So that is an incredibly important part of Assure, because that's why these machines are getting better and cheaper as well, you know.
Excellent, thank you. Wade, can you talk a little bit about how American Gem Society has used Project Assure and their testing results and decisions being made regarding the Accredited Gem Lab, and really kind of maybe even take a step back and explain what an Accredited Gem Lab is?
Sure. Yeah. Accredited Gem Lab is an AGS designation it's given to a member firm that meets specific requirements to actually have a gem lab on their premises and has the appropriate staff to use it. Part of the requirements is we have a list of equipment that is required. There has to be access to a gemological library, AGS master diamonds for color grading, and a part of those instruments is included the diamond screening equipment. And so the staff that's required for an AGL is either a certified gemologist or a certified gemologist appraiser. And actually the designation of certified gemologist appraiser, the title, that person does need access to an accredited gem lab to retain that title. So that kind of goes hand in hand. The requirements that we have for the accredited gem lab include recommendations from AGS about which diamond screening equipment is most suited to uphold standards, and that's all based on thresholds that come out of the assured directory. We trust the third-party testing process. As a third-party laboratory, AGS Laboratories, we understand that that's very important. And so a lot of the thresholds that we've built in for our recommendations include things like a 0% false positive rate. That's a recommended stat for the piece of equipment, which isn't really a threshold. It's pretty much an ultimate stat. The referral rate to be 5% or less, and so on and so forth. There is a recommendation for pretty much all of the recorded stats that come out of the assured directory. If you would like more information about Accredited Gem Lab or see this information, there is the Accredited Gem Lab requirements that has the diamond screening addendum to it on the AGS website, ags.org/accredited gem lab. That has that information, or you can contact me or just info@AGS, and we can get you that information as well. We thought it was extremely important to put out some recommendations for our members, so that there's a bit of a guide as far as what we feel is an appropriate threshold for the screening equipment, understanding the limitations and the range of equipment that's out there. Something that Joel said before is just because a piece of equipment is expensive doesn't necessarily mean it's the best. So looking at the accuracy rates, understanding the limitations, being able to communicate those to a consumer and have that continuous through your supply chain with multiple points potentially of testing is what we think is also important.
Thank you. I have one final question for Sara, and then we'll take some questions. Are you familiar with any litigation that is out there in the past or currently regarding selling undisclosed lab-grown diamonds?
So we certainly know that it has happened. And I can't speak to any specific cases, but we do know from, JVC members who have come to us who have said, hey, I think I'm in a pickle, what do I do? And one of the solutions that we actually have at JVC is our mediation practice. So we take on mediation cases where there are disputes between consumers and jewelers or intertrade disputes. And we can actually resolve those in our mediation practice for a low fee without involving lawyers. So I would suggest that if you get into that situation, you don't have to be a JVC member to use our mediation service, although it's less expensive if you are. And we would love to try to help you navigate that dispute and come to some kind of solution before involving lawyers and getting the costs high. So that's a potential path forward that I would suggest.
Thank you very much. All right, let's field some questions. Robin, are you going to pose these questions to the panelists?
Sure, I can do that. We do have a few, and I'll start here. Hello, I'm an independent appraiser who needs a small, portable lab-grown diamond screener that is quick and efficient to use. I'm intrigued by the Yehuda Dr. Watson screener that was introduced at the JCK show in Las Vegas this past summer. Will the next Assure 2.0 report discuss the testing results for this new device?
I can answer that question. So yes, I believe that machine will be included in 2.0 because I know that the manufacturer has sent them. So it will. I can't speak right now to any of those results because they're not final. So just keep a lookout at the end of October for those updated results. I also want to point out that just because I've had this question, we, as the NDC or ashore, we do not sell machines or make money off of machines in absolutely any way. And then that means that I cannot actually recommend a machine either. So in order for us to stay completely impartial and non-biased, I can't actually recommend a machine, but what I usually like to tell people is a lot of these results speak for themselves. So
to kind of piggyback on that too, also at the AGS, we do not recommend specific machines, but we do provide those thresholds of our recommended accuracies and things like that. And then we would like our membership to do their own research. And Joel actually mentioned too, depending on how you're using the machine, there's different machines for different purposes. So doing that research is extremely important.
And jumping in there, if you have a designation of CGA or ICGA, or just have an accredited gem lab, there are requirements for what that machine has. So even if maybe Dr. Watson will go through that test, that does not mean it will meet the standards that will meet the AGS minimum standards to have your lab. So it's tricky to even suggest when to buy a machine, because if you're going to buy it now, there is a list. It's on the website. It's under the Accredited Gem Lab requirements as to what that machine has to have. So as the labs begin to be audited, you don't have a machine that meets those requirements, you'll have to potentially upgrade. So it's really important to do the research ahead of time, figure out, or see what the AGS requirements are, and then compare that to the results from Project Ashore to know that it actually meets the requirements.
Okay. Do you have any more responses to that question? No. Okay, we have another question. Great discussion so far, and thank you to the panelists for their time. For those who are not already familiar, could someone please briefly differentiate the term tester from screener?
I don't know if Wayne or Joe.
Yeah, at the Gem Sciences, these are diamond verification instruments. These are diamond screening devices. Test implies pass, fail. None of these are testing anything. They are screening. That means there is the possibility it could require more. I really want to avoid that word tester at all possible. The labs can test. AGSL, GIA, and other alphabet soup of gem labs, they've got the ability to test definitively using equipment well into the six figures to say, this is natural, this is lab grown. So to really avoid that word at all costs, avoid the word testing at all costs at the retail level, because again, that just kind of adds to the confusion with the consumer in particular. It's not just put it on a machine, pass, fail. There's no silver bullet. There's no one machine to fit every role. So,
and even in saying that, at the laboratory level, when we are doing our testing, we have a testing process that often includes more than one of those almost unattainable to the standard, to the normal public price point machines, unless you want to build that sort of testing laboratory, which requires a lot of expertise as well. But that testing process often, even at the laboratory level, is using multiple instruments to make a definitive call.
Our next question is a two-parter, actually. Here's the start of it. On the second page of the cover letter for jewelry appraisals, I have included the following paragraph. Does this paragraph protect me if I do not identify a synthetic diamond? And I'll read the paragraph to you. Currently, in modern laboratories, synthetic diamonds are being created through a process known as high pressure, high temperature, HPHT, and through another process known as chemical vapor deposition. I don't know if I said the right, CVD. Sophisticated instruments can usually distinguish the synthetic laboratory-created diamonds from natural diamonds. At this time, I do not have the liability or technology to determine whether diamond is natural or synthetic, nor do I have the ability to determine if it has been irradiated or treated to enhance its color. For the purpose of this appraisal, I assume that it is a natural diamond having natural color.
I can start just by saying that, first of all, unfortunately, I can't tell you whether this paragraph will cover you or not, because that would be providing legal advice. And while I am a lawyer, I am not your lawyer. So if you want, I would suggest contacting a lawyer to review that to ensure that it is going to protect you. My instinct is that it is not. While I understand what you're trying to do here to disclaim any liability for not having any instrumentation to test or to screen. Unfortunately, I think that the language, while nice, does not protect us from providing inaccurate information.
Yep, and then I'll jump in as not an attorney, but I will say that is probably not going to protect you because, like I said, it goes back to you're the expert, you're the paid professional. There are cases where, I don't want to say that's willful negligence or recklessness, but if you're being paid as a professional to provide a professional service, yes, there's certain limiting conditions and extenuating circumstances, and depending on the appraisal organization you're in, different terminology for that. You're still being paid as a professional. You really shouldn't. I'm trying to think of another good example. I can get water from the main at my house to a faucet. That does not make me a plumber. That doesn't mean I know the steps along the way. Can I get to the final outcome? Yes, probably, but the problems along the way, who knows what could happen? And in the event, something goes wrong, I'm still liable. I made the mistake, I screwed up, whatever. It's the same thing with the appraisal, because you're ultimately saying, this isn't meant to sound insulting, but I'm not professional enough to get the equipment that I need to at least have some idea. And in any of the screeners that we use, even in my appraisals, I say, I have this equipment, I have screened it to this degree. I'm the gemologist. I'm saying this is a diamond or this is not a diamond. If it's something significant, I mean, if I've got a 2-carat diamond on my screening device, it says refer, I'm going to have the conversation with the consumer and say, hey, look, there's a possibility we could remove it, send it to the lab, or, to a lab, and have that done. Yeah, you're still the professional, and to completely waive all that, it's just not possible. I mean, yeah, I don't think that's possible to completely waive all your liability with one statement like that.
We have another Q&A. This one is for Sara. First, they start off, thank you for all your time. This webinar has been very needed and informative. Sara, if a stone refers on a DVI that a company owns, the owner sends the stone to a laboratory to test and the stone comes back as natural. Does the owner of the stone required need to know what process was used to verify the stone is natural? Or by having a confirmation by the lab the stone is natural, that is sufficient?
So I would say that I think there's two situations here. If this is a product that just came into your regular inventory and you screened it and you ended up needing to send it out to a lab and then it came back natural, I think you can just keep that report and take some notes, like make a notation about that. And I don't think you need to disclose that to the consumer itself. Like you have the information backing it up that it's a natural product. If it's something else, it's something the consumer brought to you, and they own it, or even if another manufacturer brought it to you, and that I want to sell this to you, and you sent it out, and this was the process that happened, then yes, I do think that the consumer, that owner of the product, should be informed about the process you went through, because down the line maybe they go somewhere else and this happens again, and they might want to come back and say, hey, this thing happened, and you were involved in this, and did you know about this? So I think that if it's just normal inventory coming in and going out, not a big deal. You don't need to say that to the consumer. But if it is a different situation, like it's, consignment goods, or a consumer selling something back to you, that kind of situation, information is helpful there.
I think I'll add in something I said earlier. It's no different than selling a sapphire in your store. You don't disclose to the consumer that I ran a refractive index and the polariscope, and you're selling it as a sapphire, as a natural sapphire. It's technically it's the same thing. I don't tell them that I used a touchstone test or electronic tester to say that it is 14 karat gold versus 18 karat gold. It's your warranty. I mean, if you're selling it, it comes back to you. It doesn't honestly matter if the lab, you can't go back to the lab and blame it on the lab. If you got it wrong, you're at fault, or it's your problem. You can take it up with your vendor later, but to the consumer, it doesn't matter.
I think too, if a consumer, or if your customer brings something in and you run it on a tester and it comes up as, or run it on a screener and it comes up as refer, and you have the option to send that to the lab, have that conversation with your customer. See if they want it sent to a lab, or it's really going to depend on your policy and your procedures and how that conversation goes. But that way they'll know the whole process of what is the plan and what they can expect, whether it be a definitive call made by a laboratory, or are they, confident in one way or the other? But I think it's a conversation to have with the customer.
Do any of the panelists have any last points that they'd like to add to the discussion? Any closing statements, if you will?
I have one thing. Just that if you are sitting here listening to this and thinking, I don't have any agreements in place with any of my suppliers about testing anything, I have a solution for you. On the JVC website, we have our Diamond Supply Chain Protection Kit. In that kit, it's available for free download. In that kit is a bunch of templates that you can use to set up agreements with your suppliers in terms of how often they are going to test supply when they send it to you. It's not it's not plug and play. You need to adapt it to your specific circumstances and your suppliers, but it's a great starting point if you want to start to get some of these agreements in place. Our website is jvclegal.org. And again, it's a free download.
I would just add, no matter what you do put in place, consistency, consistency, consistency. Don't take shortcuts. Don't, oh, that's Mrs. Smith. I've known her forever. I'm sure it's fine. Or like Sara was saying, our grandfather's great-grandfather. There's a certain amount of trust, but don't take shortcuts. When you go to a bank and you hand them $10,000 in cash and you want a deposit, they don't set it off to the side and say, oh, we know, Joel. I'm sure it's all there. No, you have to take those steps. Don't let the customer dictate your speed. Don't let them rile you. It's your professionalism on the line. Be consistent from every single interaction.
And I can just say, keep a lookout for the new Ashore directory is launching, 2.0 is launching in mid to late October, and those new 2.0 results for all of the updated machines are going to start rolling in at that time. So just keep a lookout for that. It's it's exciting, and it isn't a completely ongoing. 2.0 is completely ongoing. So as new machines come onto the market, the idea is now that we have 2 laboratories. We will be testing them as soon as the manufacturer of the machine will get them to us. So we're hoping that it's going to be a lot quicker in the future now that we have multiple laboratories. And again, that website is on, our website is naturaldiamonds.com, or you could just Google, Ashore diamond, and it's the first thing that pops up.
And I would just like to close with thank you all. I mean, it was an honor to be on this webinar with such an esteemed panel. If anybody on this webinar or anybody viewing this webinar after its live air has any questions, please contact us at AGS. We're happy to help. If there's any questions one way or the other, we can find an answer for you or refer you to a lot of our members, our sustaining members. And if there's questions about AGLs, anything, we're here to help. So let us know.
I'd like to conclude with thanking our panelists for their time this afternoon. You truly are the experts that were as advertised, and thank you to the American Gem Society for allowing us this time to discuss this very important topic. And with that, I will say good afternoon to all of you.
Take care.
Thank you.